lawyers, judges, they will have to sit down someday and decide how to get over this issue. These, as I highlighted today, are only the practical aspect of it. How it to be done is something which I have not been able to think of so far, because I think that even if no adjournments were granted, all the judges came in time, all of them worked very hard, dependency will stick with that. It can never be. In the present circumstances, it's difficult to get rid of it. Now, the other aspect of the matter which I wanted to say a few things was the public participation in framing of laws. Now, in the broadest sense of the term, we have representatives in the parliament, in the legislatures, state legislatures. They represent the people. They make the laws. To that extent, our views are perhaps reflected in the laws as they are enacted. But what is being said today is that apart from that also, when a law is sought to be enacted, people should be heard in the sense that their views, their opinions should also find place in the law. We know that the committees of the parliament, they do hear people, important people, social activists, others interested with that branch of law before a law is finalized. But then today the thinking is that something more than that. I don't know what is something more than that, but let me tell you the pitfalls. You see, there was a time when we all started talking about the law being kind to certain sections. And the first section, which was to benefit, were the juveniles. So we had to do justice with juveniles. That act came into force. Lenient towards the juveniles. They were not treated as criminals. Even if they committed an offense, the law thought that they can be reformed. Therefore, why send them to jail? Why not reform them? That was the public demand. That's how the law was framed. Now, I want to say one thing at the threshold. I'll take you to other branches also. When the parliament acts as a lawmaking body, my view is that it should act in a normal way in normal times. Whenever a law is made or framed or enacted under some pressure, the law that is the resultant is an imbalanced law. Because you are influenced by what has happened recently, and you make a law to protect that section which has been adversely affected by what has happened. And in doing so, you forget the other aspect of the picture. That's where we commit mistakes. Let me illustrate this. Now, so Juvenile Justice Act, you protected the juvenile. The international thinking was that they should be reformed. We also fell in line. Good. Then came, you must frame some laws for protection of women. Very valuable thing to do, because a lot of cases came to light where there were atrocities committed on women, daughters-in-law, things like that. And then a series of amendments took place in the Indian Penal Code to give protection to the female, which was a very laudable objective. But then what happened? That law was misused to such an extent that today we are thinking of doing something with that law also. Because that was done at a time when there was a lot of pressure on the parliament. No, this law has to be amended. Then there was a time when they said, you can't order death sentence. That's not permissible. Human being can't, only God can take away the life given to a human being. So there was a big move saying there should be no death sentence. In our country, that was not accepted. And all that the Supreme Court said was, in the rarest of rare cases, this punishment can be imposed, not in ordinary cases. So ordinary case of murders, life sentence or whatever. Now, we recently witnessed a very dastardly event that took place in Bombay. And then the same people who were talking for the juvenile, who were speaking against death sentence, are today saying, no, don't exempt the juvenile. He has done an act which is unpardonable. He should also be punished like any other person, and he should be sentenced to death. That, I suppose, all of you remember these things came out in the press. So, how do you find out what public opinion is? If you go by individual cases. You can't, if you talk to ordinary man in the street, everyone has his own views. I don't think the lawmaker can take all those views into account. It has to be through some organized channel or some activist bodies, things like that. And look, these laws have been framed. All of them have been framed under some pressure. And all of them, in their implementation, have disclosed that you have looked at only one side of the picture. You have not looked to the other side of the picture. That is because you are under pressure to legislate. Therefore, my view is that the Parliament should legislate in normal times and in a normal mood, not under pressures. And whenever a law is produced, a law is enacted, which is on account of any sort of pressure from any group or person or public, that law will be found to be an imbalanced law and will require further changes in future. Now see where the law has not been framed, where it should have been framed. Long ago, Supreme Court gave a judgment, Vishakha's case, well-known case, where certain protection were given to women in their workplaces and other things also, court proceedings. Argument was, where is the law? The Supreme Court said, all right, there may be no law. We are laying down the guidelines. Until the Parliament formulates the law, these guidelines will operate. They are operating till today. The Parliament has not made a law. Therefore, Parliament is supreme, so far as the legislative field is concerned. Supreme Court sometimes advises them that it is desirable to frame laws, but it can't command the Parliament to make laws. That's a function of the Parliament. And the Parliament decides for itself when to frame the law and what law to be framed. But certainly, the people of this country are the ultimate sovereigns, and their voice has to be heard. How the Parliament will do it is something which is for the Parliament to decide, and I'm sure they'll do it in a very fair manner. Now, these are my opening observations. I'm sure you'll have a very fruitful discussion in the following sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Singh, for an excellent expose of the perception of judges in regard to their difficulties, problems, and their excellent performance. I would not like to join issues with him because it is not a seminar on judicial reforms, but I am tempted to say that there is another side of this story. May I now request Honorable Minister Dr. Purandeshwari to deliver her inaugural keynote address.
Honorable Justice Mr. P.K. Singh, Dr. Kashyap, Shri Kaviraj Singh, delegates, participants, invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by saying it is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be here amongst all of you this morning, even as INBA celebrates the Law Day. Well, even as I was sitting and listening to Mr. Singh on the deep insights that he gave us on the legal aspects and the lawyers' difficulties and challenges and so on, and even as I was looking at the audience, seeing a lot of legal experts sit there, I was wondering what was I doing here probably a fish out of the water, just a policymaker who's sharing the stage with the legal experts. This just brought to my mind an experience of mine when I had first entered the parliament in 2004. This is slightly on the lighter vein. I was kind of lost initially, not knowing how do I intervene in the parliament proceedings, how do I make my interventions, how do I raise questions, and so on, which was when I asked a senior colleague of mine as to whether he could guide me when it comes to all of this. He looked at me, gave me a very complacent smile, and said, Purandeshri, this is the easiest thing that you can do. The minute you think you want to make an intervention in the parliament, he said, raise your hand. Went on further to say, don't bring your hand down until the speaker sees you, despite it going numb with pain. And then he said the speaker would definitely catch you, and then he would call your name, which is when you need to rise to make your interventions. And the minute you say, thank you, sir, you would hear a bell ring, just to indicate that the 2 minutes allotted to you is over and you need to sit down. But he went on to say, don't sit down, because as a parliamentarian, it is your right to speak. And as a speaker, it is his duty to ring the bell. So ignore it and continue speaking. But he went on, what he added later on was quite interesting, because he said, Purandeshri, you can speak for n number of hours and say nothing, which is something that I need to decipher even to this day, how you could speak for long, long hours and yet say nothing. This is just on the lighter vein. And that is an incident that just crossed my mind as I was sitting here on the dais. But let me say, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate INBA for actually bringing the legal fraternity, industry, policymakers onto one dais, where issues and challenges could actually be debated, deliberated, discussed, and probably the resolution that comes out of the conference could actually be a beacon of light for policymakers even as they're making their policies. The topic that I was actually, the topic that was suggested to me was liberalization of FDI in India. But even before I start speaking about the liberalization of FDI in India, probably we need to speak of the incredible economic journey of a credible economy called India. Well, the term emerging markets, as we all know, was coined almost 3-4 decades ago, but came largely to be used probably in the 1900s. And this word was actually coined by the World Bank at that point of a time. And from a handful of economies, say in East and Southeast Asia, the word was expanded to include economies in the Middle East, West and East Europe, Latin America, and even Africa as well. And today, among the emerging markets, India is considered to be a sleeping giant who has just woken up from her sleep, next only to China. These emerging markets, as we all know, do play a very important role when it comes to the progress and the growth of the global GDP. What happens in these emerging markets have a great impact on the entire global GDP, both in terms of the demographics as well as in terms of the economics. When we look at the demographics, these are the markets that actually house almost half the world population. You have a large consumer base here, yearning for better living opportunities, better living conditions, and therefore they offer markets to probably the entire world. And India herself, with a 1.2 billion population and an ever-increasing middle class of anywhere around 400 million, is indeed a large market which the entire world is today focusing on. And her confident stride forward is being watched by the entire world. Even as we talk of India, a giant that has woken from her sleep, we also need to take into account the two large global slowdowns that we were actually faced with in the recent past. The first one being in 2008, which had its epicenter in the United States of America. People did strongly believe that India was going to crumble, which was then, it would be incorrect if I were to say that we were completely insulated from the global slowdown, but definitely we did feel the ripple effect of the global slowdown. When we compare ourselves to China, which was probably growing at around 13% at that point of a time, slipped down to 9%. But India, which was growing at around 8%, slipped to 6%, which is 2 percentage point drop. The reason for us not being as badly affected as the other economies of the world were affected is thanks to the conservative banking system that we have in our country, which probably the Western countries and the developed economies did want to, it wouldn't be right to say ridiculed, but rather didn't take it seriously, but called us very, very conservative. But it was that conservative banking system that probably saved us from actually crumbling down under the pressure of the global recession or slowdown. Along with that, we do have a large consumer-driven economy in our country, and everything, or largely what was produced by us, was actually consumed by our own sections of people in our country. And these were the two main reasons which rather protected us from crumbling very badly under the weight of the global slowdown in 2008. And then came the global slowdown in 2010, or rather the Eurozone crisis, as it was called. We are yet to come out of the effect of the Eurozone crisis. And it is here that we are today looking at non-conventional markets, even as we strengthen our presence in the conventional markets like the United States and the UK themselves. This is why we have been looking at Latin America and more particularly at Africa, because we believe that among